First part of session 94. Let's begin this session talking about what I define as the last separation. Let's begin. This session is going to be, in terms of the content of what we have been exploring in the archetypical mind, it's going to concentrate on the experience of mind, which is the fourth card of the tarot in the line of actually all cards, and also the line of the mind cycle. So, for example, the experience of body would be the fourth card in the cycle of the body, the way I structure it. The fourth card in the line or cycle of the body, and yet it would be the 11th card, I think, right? I think so. So it'd be the 11th card in the total archetypical mind or tarot. So we're going to explore that in the second part and possibly the third part of this session, because it's rather long, about 30 questions. And this part is going to be mostly, if not all of it, personal material. As you know, some of the material that we read in the Raw Contact was selected for book 5 years later, a decade later or more. And that was because some of the material wasn't deemed necessary for the study of the Law of One, and yet it's included now in everything, and I am including it here. So, well, we're going to begin with these, which are maintenance questions, and then the conversation is going to go there. But as I decided to title this episode, The Last Separation, it has to do with one of the questions towards the end that Carla had actually for Ra. So let's get into this personal material, and remember that this was a contact that was very wearying on everybody that was involved, all the three of them, and we're going to explore just that. And remembering, of course, that this was only 12 sessions before they finished the contact with everything that happened. Let's start with the first question then. As usual, Don says, could you first please give me the condition of the instrument? Ra says, there is some small increase in physical energy deficit. It is not substantial. All else is as at the previous asking. So a small increase in physical energy, which in physical energy deficit, so actually she declined a little bit more her physical energy, which wasn't much, as we know, and that had counterproductive effects on the contact. So here's Don asking for Carla. He says in question 2, I have questions here from the instrument. 1. Is our 5th density friend responsible for the instrument's extreme distortion towards pain during and just after sessions? The answer is yes. And this prompts, of course, Don to say, is there anything that we can do that we are not doing to remedy this situation, so that the instrument does not experience this pain or as much of it? His usual question, Ra is going to say, there is little that can be done due to a complex of pre-existing distortions. The distortions are triple in the source. There is the, shall we say, less than adequate work of your chirurgeons, which allows for various distortions in the left wrist area. There is a distortion called systemic lupus erythematosus, which causes the musculature of the lower left and right arms to allow for distortions in the normal, shall we say, configuration of both. Lastly, there is the nerve damage, more specifically to the left, but in both appendages from the thoracic outlet. So the first question, question 2, is the fifth density negative entity that was accompanying them during the contact and causing, some mischief present? Yes. Is it causing the physical pain? Yes. So we can see the dynamic. It's not like you're a healthy individual and then a negative entity causes distortions in you. You cause the distortions, or you are inclined towards those distortions, physical, mental, and then they can get exacerbated by the allowing of the fifth density negative entity, or not fifth density, any negative entity to increase those distortions. It's all about free will. It starts obviously with free will. That free will is manipulated and bent, but let's not get into that. So why was there little that they could do? Ra is just simply describing all the physical conditions that she had. Yes, all the physical distortions were due to, first, inadequate work from the surgeons, basically is what chirurgeons means. Then, so I guess, she had surgery and they didn't do as expected from this line of work, not very efficient. We end up being patched up as opposed to healed. That's not healing, it's patching up certain things, and they do the best that they can, of course, given the circumstances and tools and knowledge that they have. There's also the distortion of the lupus that she has, erythematosus lupus, which it's interesting. Keep this in mind because this is going to be interesting for the following questions, especially the last one, I think, on personal material. But this is an autoimmune disorder in which the autoimmune system attacks the healthy tissues of the body. So in essence, a self-attack. This has correlation, of course, with mental distortions. So you can see the relationship here. I am not much into, I forget what it's called, but biodecoding. I know it in Spanish, but biodecoding, something like that, where you can see where, in your mind, things are causing the physical illness, disease, disorder, problem. And so this one is pretty clear. There is some mental attack to the self, and so the body responds appropriately. This was present, of course, in Carla, and was, causing distortions there. We can even see here more clearly how a negative entity, which is just negative thoughts that are intensified within ourselves. If we have like I said, the free will distorted towards that, then manipulation of that is what is happening. So I said I wasn't going to explain this, but I will. Typical of me. Okay, so this is, again, the way I see it. I'm sure there are more complex ways of explaining this, but the way I see it is that in a very simplistic way, there is a distortion which we may have of self-esteem, let's call it, right? And so we attack ourselves. We attack the self, which is God, and we are, it's permissible culturally. Somehow we are permitted to do harm to ourselves mentally than to others. It's fine. Like, we accept this socially, We say we if you talk to people, you realize that, like, it's easy for them to say, yeah, the blame is on me, I suck, and all these things. But it's very hard to say it to somebody else. It gets to those. Of course, people say you suck and they suck and all that stuff, but that's just a reflection of themselves. The point is that there is an attack. There is a desire to attack the self, whether it be in somebody else, which is an exacerbator already condition, and it seems normal to do it on yourself. It's still kind of morally unacceptable to call somebody else, especially in their face, that they suck, that they are inferior or something like that. But somehow it's fine to say it to ourselves. Keep that in mind, because this is something that we all have a little blemish in our soul, in ourselves, in our manifested self. So when that is there, then there are thoughts that feed that desire for attack. Negative entities will obviously see an avenue for their service, which is to exacerbate those things, more negative thoughts. Especially in people like Carla, who were presenting such a service for humanity. So we can see many things here, and this is why I would say that you're not a victim of negative entities, so to speak. You are opening their avenues of service. So what do you expect? They're going to provide their service. Likewise, if you open your mind to the service of positive entities, then lo and behold, you will be aided. This is what we know. This is the mind working. The universe gives the mind what it wants. And the thing is that we don't know consciously everything that we want. All those things are subconscious or unconscious. So what gives? Go inside. Learn to listen to your conscious mind. Change everything. Shift your reality. Manifest your dream world, etc. All of that comes from this understanding. Lastly, they say there is nerve damage, more specifically to the left, but in both appendages from the thoracic outlet. Now, I understand thoracic as being part of the back, the spine, and I guess it's radiating towards the appendages. I think they're talking about their arms, not their legs, or her legs, to be more precise. So there's a lot of physical damage, and then there is that, which is not said here. This is just my interpretation, but it makes sense to me. What else does Ra say here as a suggestion, or what can they do? They say there is little that can be done. I read this already. They say in the course of the waking behavior, the instrument can respond to the various signals which ring the toxin. Toxin sounds like toxin, Toxin, but it's Toxin, which is like an alarm bell of pain. So signals and rings the bell of pain, thus alerting the mind complex, which in turn moves the physical complex in many and subtle configurations, which relieve the various distortions. Your friend greets these distortions, as has been stated before, immediately prior to the beginning of the working. So, interesting. They're describing here that in the course of the waking state of Carla, so when she's out and about, these distortions are sort of alleviated, right? Like we feel the pain and we react to it. We stretch it. We make a compression. Depending on the type of pain, we react to it. That's what Ra says. Which we move the physical complex in many subtle configurations, which relieve the various distortions. So that's what they're saying there. During the waking state, we do that, and Carla did the same. Now, Ra says that their friend, and I like that they call it friend, not because it sounds lovely and adorable, but because, again, we have to be amicable to a specific distortion to invite those entities or those mental configurations. Yes, and so the universe responds accordingly and says, oh, you like talking crap about yourself? Well, your reality is going to reflect that because that's what you like. Or the universe is saying to itself, oh, I enjoy this, or I am doing this, let me do more of this. This is why I say that God is innocent, it doesn't know anything. It's learning as it goes. And what it finds, which is truth, is love. Now, if you follow love, you won't go wrong, you see. So much to talk about here because this is psychotherapy in so many ways. But yeah, let's continue with the session. Each question allows me to just expand on anything and everything. It's amazing. So okay, that's the friend because it's invited. Even if it's unconscious to the entity, it's always invited. So what does it do? It attacks, it exacerbates these distortions prior to the beginning of the working. So whenever it can, it'll do that just to distort the physical complex in a way that they could limit the amount of information that they could get. It's very efficient. Very tactical too. Ra continues and says, however, during the working, the instrument is not with its yellow ray chemical vehicle, and thusly the many small movements which could most effectively aid in the decrease of these distortions is not possible. Ra must carefully examine the mental configurations of the mind complex in order to make even the grossest manipulation. It is not our skill to use a yellow ray vehicle. So what do we have here? Ra is describing that once Carla goes into this trance, right? Let's say she feels comfortable. She's going into this trance, and then the negative entity does its work, its service, which is to provide that intensification of distortion of pain. Carla leaves, or the mind-body-spirit complex that we call Carla leaves, and now the body is simply in that configuration. Ra comes in and finds it in that state. Ra, as they say at the end of this paragraph, they are not skilled in moving a body. So if she was in trance, there was no way that Ra could have, sit up, talk normally, open the eyes, move about. All of this is an investment, a very heavy investment of a mind-body-spirit complex in this body. I have a vision of how this works, which I hope I can explain. But there is pure awareness, which has no limitations, and thus it doesn't do anything. Right? There is non-doership, if you will. That's a part of ourselves, the I am state. Then all of that moves into further limitation, which is the most limited state of separation that we have known is this human body, right? Self-awareness, of course. Self-aware limitation. And so all of this requires us focusing, a deep concentration of awareness into this limited form. You see? So the further away we are, or the closer we are to infinity, the more difficult it is to manipulate this body. And so since Ra is sixth density, which is way deep in the portions of the cosmic mind, then it's very difficult for them to make any movements in the body, because it would need to be invested fully into it and lose most of its awareness, so limiting itself more. So this is a way to visualize also the purity of the information that is given here, why it is why it is regarded as the best channeling that we have currently in modern era. I think it describes that because there was no mental human there. There was no mind involved there. There was just this pure distilling of sixth density information coursing through the body and then uttering the words, right? So much we can talk about here as speculation as to how this works, because everything I just said is not something that, it's set in stone. It's just my speculation of how things work, but that's what makes sense to me, based on what I read, what I understand, and my own experience in meditation, which is just another way. I mean, you can see that that's why we relax for deep meditation. At least, those of us who are unskilled in decades of meditation. Other people who have meditated for decades, they can get into deep meditation while, in a conversation and so on. And we move through that spectrum over time. But then again, it just describes the investment of awareness into physical form to move, to be in this separation state. But all right, I don't wish to stay too long in this question. So yeah, Ra cannot manipulate, and so what happens whenever she has pain, it takes a long time for them to even make a small adjustment, which for us is just a fraction of a second where we say, ouch, we kind of stretch it. Moving on. Ra finishes and says, the weight of the cover has some deleterious effect upon these distortions in some cases, and thus we mentioned that there was a small thing which could be done. Yay, finally something they could do. That is the framing of that which lifted the coverlet from the body slightly, in order to compensate for loss of warmth. The wearing of material warming, the manual appendages would then be indicated. So there's a small thing that they can do, which is to lift or raise a little bit more the coverlet, the blanket, whatever they were using. Lift it a little bit because it was too heavy, I guess, and that caused maybe some numbing or a compression in the circulation of the blood, something. It caused something. And then there is, because it's going to be lifted, then she's going to be a little bit more cold. If it's not one thing, it's the other. So lift the weight so it's not too heavy, and cover with something lighter, I would say. The hands, is what they're saying. So this is what we would call min-maxing the situation. All right, let's move to the next question. Don says in question 4, I immediately think of the instrument wearing long underwear under the robe that it now wears and an extremely light white cover. Would this be satisfactory? And Ra says, due to this instrument's lack of radiant physical energy, the heavier cover is suggested. My speculation here is that, well, not speculation, my take on this is that, yes, Carla had very little physical energy, so she was more prone to the cold. So something heavier would help on that. And yeah, that's it, just to preserve the heat of the body. Question 5, Don says, in your statement near the beginning of it, you said, less than adequate work of your, that's when they said chirurgeon, which is a surgeon. And he's just asking, and there was a word that I didn't understand at all. That was it. Are you familiar with the word that I am trying to understand? Ra says no, but we know it's chirurgeon or surgeon. Very old, archaic word. Don says in question 6, we'll have to wait until we transcribe the material then. I assume that our fifth density negative friend doesn't cause the distortion all the time simply because he wishes to emphasize the fact that the instrument is going to be distorted only if she attempts one of these service to others workings, therefore attempting to stifle the working. Is this correct? Ra says, this is partially correct. The incorrect portion is this: the entity of which you speak has found its puissance less than adequate to mount a continuous assault upon this instrument's physical vehicle, and has, shall we say, chosen the more effective of the space-time nexi of this instrument's experience for its service. So, puissance, I had to look it up. Ra is using some really obscure words here. Their vocabulary is showing up. But it means the height of the strength, like the peak of the capacity to do work, I guess. Something like that. So the question is that it doesn't want to do. Yeah, it's not fully true the way I understand it. So so Don says it is, it wants the negative entity is not continuously doing this because it wants to emphasize the moment of the contact, maybe to discourage Carla from doing it. But in a way, yes, but no. It seems like the most important part is because prior to the contact is where Carla would not be able to correct or alleviate this by simply moving her body, the way I understand it. So that's why Ra says that it has chosen the more effective of the space-time nexi of this instrument's experience for its own service, basically, for the negative entity service. So that's it. That's what I get here. It doesn't do it all the time because, I mean, it could, but then Carla would simply alleviate those distortions. But it finds that the physical manipulation of this pain is more effective for its own service, negative service, if it's done prior to the working, because that's when Carla can do anything about it. And only Carla can know about the pain, right? So basically, they are like causing a sabotage on the energy. And when Ra comes in, then they find, of course, the distorted body, which is, what do they find? They find an instrument that has been distorted in a specific direction due to free will and the consequences of that direction, and then exacerbated by negative entities which provide their service. Simple as that. Next question. Question 7. Don says, could you tell me why I have felt so extremely tired on several recent occasions? Ra says, this has been covered in previous material. The contact which you now experience costs a certain amount of energy, which each of the group brought into manifestation in the present incarnation. Although the brunt of this cost falls upon the instrument, it is caparisoned by a pre-incarnative design with the light and gladsome armor of faith and will to a far more conscious extent than most mind-body-spirit complexes are able to enjoy without much training and initiation. So here we're getting into the description of, let's say, Don, Carla, and Jim's predisposition for this contact, the reason why they were able to do it, and the situation, their personal situation surrounding it. So why is Don tired? This evokes a very long answer from Ra. The first thing they say is that it costs a lot of energy, vital energy, to do this contact. And there are reasons why it is so demanding on the three of them. especially, as they said, on Carla, because she takes the brunt of it. She's the one doing the highest sacrifice, right? She is completely giving herself for this contact. She was fully committed. We can find that full commitment in Don's work too, because his mind was completely bent towards this contact. He said it several times. This is my life's work. This is what I actually came here to do. He recognized it. And Jim also had that. I'm speculating here, knowing Jim's story, that Jim had no interest in anything. He was just interested in, just living the mystical life. And when I say that he wasn't interested in anything, I mean he wasn't interested in mundane things. That society, especially in the 70s, was booming and doing many things, and he was. It doesn't do service to call him a hippie, but something like that. He was a very bohemian, well-educated, and wise man that was looking for that which was beyond, physical and esoteric stuff. And he found, a calling in this when he first listened to the radio. Carla and Don were on a show, and he was, he fell in love with it. And so synchronicities led them to meet, and when they met, Jim had a full commitment to this too. So this is the story of how the contact initiated, because the three of them created enough commitment for Ra to be able to channel some information through them first, and the rest is the story that we are going through right now. So everybody was giving a lot, a full commitment, life committed, right? They had nothing or very little else to worry about or think about but this. So this allowed Ra to contact them. So even though Carla takes the brunt of the costs, then they're going to say that they didn't say it here, but everybody else is also given that energy. But to describe Carla's reason why she was taking the brunt of it, or why she was able to do this, is because prior to the incarnation, she was caparison. It's a beautiful word, actually. In Spanish, caparazón means shell, or an armor could be also. It's mostly used for animals who have a shell. So caparison in English actually means to be adorned, to be embellished, or clothed in beautifully. So she was caparison with the light and gladsome armor of faith and will, to a far more conscious extent than most mind-body-spirit complexes are able to enjoy without much training and initiation. So this sounds like Carla was very advanced, right? Well, yes and no. Yes, that she exhibited a more natural, I would say, inherent and spontaneous capacity to do spiritual work. However, the fact that she wasn't trained on it is not something to say, wow, that's awesome. Yeah, from a point of view, it's great. But in the other, that's what caused most of the trouble, because she wasn't trained. And Ross suggested many things, but they didn't train her. They didn't abridge free will and said, no. You're not fully prepared for the raw contact. Let us train you so you can become more. That's an infringement of free will. Yet they were very cautious always to say, consider this, consider that, martyrdom, all these things, because these were all distortions that Carla had that exacerbated the conditions that made her vital energies so depleted. So again, something to keep in mind, because all these behaviors can be present in us. Such a full commitment without regards for anything else, And that's where I want to lead the message of this episode towards the end. So keep this in mind as well. Carla's condition, which on the one hand, it looks phenomenal because for us, for us, I mean the Western world, and actually the whole world is westernized already. But for us in the Western world, magical capacities is always revered, like, oh wow, this person has psychic powers. But a couple of things. How well balanced is this individual for the service that they provide with their inherent magical capacities? Well, that's something to be considered. And the other thing is what direction, because somebody can have psychic powers, but are they on the positive or the negative path? That's going to determine the product of what they can channel. Having magical capabilities is not an indicative of spiritual maturity or spiritual polarity in many ways. That's why it's very common, and people talk about this. How can people have psychic powers who are so egotistical? Well, because it has nothing to do with spiritual maturity. It's like saying, beautiful example. We have athletes, right? Sportsmen who are very detached, and they're very humble, and they're great. And there are others who are amazing too, perhaps even better than these who are humble, very connected with source, we could say. And yet these ones are egotistical. They have a strong ego. Why? Because physical development is not correlated with spiritual maturity. Simple as that. Psychic powers is like physical powers. Somebody who can be a boxer or a baseball player or a runner, that's physical prowess. Mental prowess is being able to accomplish things in the mental world. Fantastic, great. We shouldn't praise any of the two more than the spiritual maturity that informs that power, that informs that capacity of providing service. So we need a little bit of education there, and I think this is something that I see a lot in spiritual circles, how people are aware of this and say, how is it possible, that some people have psychic powers? Well, the same thing. How is it possible that people have, verbal power? Does that mean they're really intelligent? Not really. But yeah, let me not linger too long here. Keep that in mind, because that's important for the ending. Let's read more about Ra. They finish and say, those of the support group also offer the essence of will and faith in service to others, that dedication that I talked about, supporting the instrument as it releases itself completely in the service of the one creator. Therefore, each of the support group also experiences a weariness of the spirit which is indistinguishable from physical energy deficit, except that if each experiments with this weariness, each shall discover the physical energy in its usual distortion. So in essence, both Don and Jim supported Carla in the process of releasing herself to enter this full trance to make the contact with Ra. And there was, of course, a dedication, a service there. That commitment that I was talking about, that's what allowed them to have the contact with Ra. And so it's taxing also on them. But it's not as taxing as Carla. Also, if they wanted to know how much it affected them, they could analyze their own physical energy. That's it. Moving on. Don says in question 8, thank you. I really didn't mean to go over previous material. I should have phrased my question more carefully so that is what I expected. He paused there. Wasn't me. I was trying to get confirmation of the fact that I suspected that. I will be more careful in questioning from now on. He continues and says, from the instrument we have the question. While vacationing, I uncover a lot about myself not consciously known before. It seems to me that I coast on the spiritual gifts given at birth and never have spent any time getting to know my human self, which seems to be a child, immature, and irrational. Is this so? Ra says this is partially correct. And Don continues and says, then she says, if this is so, this seems to be part of the riddle about the manner of beingness that Ra spoke of. I fear if I do not work successfully on my human distortions, I shall be responsible for losing the contact. Yet also Ra suggests, the over-dedication to any outcome is unwise. Could Ra comment on these thoughts, which seems paradoxical? So I read a lot. I want to give a bit of context here. Carla is saying that in some leisure time that she had, vacation, and I am going to speculate here that this vacation was from the Ra contact, maybe, because I don't think she worked back then. Maybe she did. I'm not sure. But the thing is that she had some time to let go of the commitment and dedication to only think about the Ra contact. Again, I'm speculating here. But it seems that at that moment, she realized that key words here, I want to reread what Carla said, that she has been coasting on her spiritual gifts, which is just, floating around with these gifts, traveling her life with just focusing on her spiritual gifts, and she hasn't paid more attention to her human side, which is, she considers it to be childish, immature, and irrational. Now, there is a reality to this, and I will speak about this. Just consider that Carla is saying, I noticed that I've been always in my spiritual realm, and I haven't paid attention to my human side, which seems to be childish, immature, and irrational. If this is true, which Ra already said is partially correct, and I have my take on this, but it's partially correct. Why is it partially correct? I'll talk about this. But first, Dawn is asking for Carla. She says, if this is so, then this seems to be part of that riddle that Ra said, figure it out. What's going on with you? Why are you doing this? See, you need to find out more about yourself. And then she poses the seemingly paradoxical situation in which she needs to work on these things, but then Ra also suggested that over-dedication to any outcome is unwise. This doesn't seem like a riddle to me. This doesn't even seem like a paradox, but to her it seemed, and it's fine. You see, I don't want to sound like, this is nothing. It doesn't seem a riddle to me because I can see clearer than she could, I guess, at that moment. It's always easier to see it from a different perspective, right? That's why we look at things from other people's perspective, and it's helpful. We are mirrors. So again, I'm not suggesting that I am wiser or anything like that, but at the same time, I'm saying what I see. And it doesn't look like a riddle to me because of the following. Carla was fully dedicated to her spiritual gifts. That had a result. That is not a problem. I think the problem is when we introduce the word problem into this. We're always looking to more efficient ways. That's what it is. But we need to recognize that something can be improved if we are to find more efficient ways, right? Are we going to call this a problem? No, I would call it an opportunity. You see, an opportunity. Otherwise, we're just stuck in stagnation. Nothing is improving. We are as we are. Nothing improves. No evolution, no experience. So my point is that we shouldn't look at things as problems but opportunities. I know that sounds cliche, I know, but go deep into it and find all those little things that you're always thinking about yourself as a problem. So for example, Ra, or rather Carla, is talking about here She looks at herself immature, childish, and so on. Sure, this is partially correct because we all are in the spectrum of evolution, very childish. Ra even said it. They said you can be compared to spiritual children or babies, something like that, a long time ago in the beginning of the sessions. Because we don't have 1,000 years to develop fully as a total enlightened and elevated being. That's not part of the human experience anymore. A long story behind all of this, but the point is that that's true. We are that. But to see that as a problem, that is where we start to open avenues for negativity. It's not a problem. It's fine. It's fine that you are the way you are, in essence. So, I know I have digressed a lot here, but bear in mind that this is important to find out the message that I have for this episode. So, her riddle, as she sees it, is, what do I do? You say that I shouldn't commit too much on something, and yet I do need to work on these things. Let's see what Ra explains, and then I'll continue talking about this. So, what does Ra comment? They say, we comment in general first upon the query about the contact, which indicates once again that the instrument views the mind-body-spirit complex with jaundiced eye. Each mind-body-spirit complex that is seeking shall almost certainly have the immature and irrational behaviors. It is also the case that this entity, as well as almost all seekers, has done substantial work within the framework of the incarnative experience and has indeed developed maturity and rationality. So here's what it looks paradoxical, because even Ra is saying, first, in the first part, they say that they're going to comment on generally that Carla is looking at herself with jaundiced eyes. She's being judgmental of herself. So there is a sort of judgment when she says that she's childish, irrational, and immature. Jaundice means judgmental, critical, yes. So that's why Ra says, sure, anybody who is seeking will have an immature and irrational behavior. This is so profound, you see, because who is a seeker? Look at how absurd it sounds that I am a seeker of myself. Why? Why are you seeking yourself? Aren't you it? What's the problem? Well, obviously, there's a truth behind this. A seeker says, I am confused. I don't know who I am. And so it has that mentality. Everybody is a seeker. There are conscious seekers and there are unconscious seekers. Unconscious seekers, they incur into all kinds of mistakes, let's call them sin, as they should be. Spiritually, mistakes are sins. Sins are missing the mark. What is the mark? To know who you are, to know what is, period. And so a seeker is acknowledging that I don't know who I am, so I need to look for myself. So that's kind of foolish, right? That is immature and irrational. It is an immature and irrational behavior to say, I'm looking for myself. And yet it is true that the self is confused. So it's immature and irrational, just like somebody else who has lost their mind, which, we say colloquially, a guy has lost his mind, and we want to set him straight, like, wake up, remember who you are. And this is not a spiritual indication. It's just, come out of that character that you're invested in. You shake the person, you give him a shake and say, come back to your senses, So that's kind of what I see here. I see it very profound. Each mind-body-spirit complex that is seeking shall almost certainly have the immature and irrational behaviors. Now, if you're a mind, body, spirit complex that is not seeking, right, who has ended their seeking, you know who you are, then what follows is just a refinement of course, all the things that are still conditioned in your mind that sort of invite you to see yourself still as a seeker. What are you seeking? Because unconsciously we may fall into those traps again, and so a spiritual ego is developed. There's so much to say here, but this is why the raw contact is a complexity of concepts. But in the first one, Ra is saying, you are being judgmental with yourself. It is true that you as a seeker will be irrational, and that's fine because you need to find something. You're trying to solve a riddle of yourself. And then they say that it is also the case that Carla, like any other seeker, she's also developed a substantial framework in her experience that developed maturity and rationality. So I would see this as the dynamic of you investing yourself, right? Separating yourself from God into an individual that is seeking things, right? And so you become irrational and immature. But when you accomplish spiritually, you evolve spiritually, is when you return and say, there was no problem there. I had never a problem there. There was just, I was lost. And then you return, and that brings maturity and rationality. So there is a dynamic in which you invest yourself in the character, you go through the motions, and then you lose your job, you lose your partner, you lose your house or whatever. Something that seems tragical to the separate self becomes a blessing. How's that so? Seems paradoxical. It isn't. You are arriving at the same place in which you started. But you see, you bring with you a wealth of experience. And now you say, oh, it doesn't matter if I lose my job. I'm always getting a new one. And it's always better. It doesn't matter if my partner leaves me or I leave her or him. I'm always going to find somebody else. Or maybe in the end, I don't need anybody else. I'm fine, and now I have everybody equally, right? I don't have a specific love. That's fine. All of it is what I call the last separation, which I'll get to. It's the title of this video. But let's move on. Ross says that this instrument should fail to see that which has been accomplished and see only that which remains to be accomplished may well be noted. Indeed, any seeker discovering in itself this complex of mental and mental-emotional distortions shall ponder the possible non-efficacy of judgment. As we approach the second portion of the query, we view the possibility of infringement upon free will. However, we believe we may make reply within the boundaries of the law of confusion. We'll get to that too, but first, this part is gold. It's an ingot of gold here. Ra says that Carla fails to see all those things that she has accomplished and see only that which remains to be accomplished may well be noted. What does that mean? Focusing too much on what needs to be done according to my own biases and my own inclinations and my own commitment to life, to service, to everything else. This is what I would call an impetus of being. Okay? The inertia of being. And then there is the potential of being. Okay, so the two. Now, if you only look what can be accomplished in the universe, then you will live a very stressful life because there is an infinite amount of doing that can be done. Yes, I'm going to exaggerate it here so you can see it. There is an infinite amount of work that needs to be done in the universe because the doing in the universe is experience, period. The universe is experiencing itself How does it experience itself? As you, because you are the universe in movement. So that is the inertia of being. So if you focus on that, and I'm talking about your regular life, all the things that you say that you have to do, you focus on being, on doing, then you're going to feel the stress of all that doing that needs to be accomplished and what remains to be done. You see, we've all suffered from this. We know this. I know this in my heart because I do things and I'm passionate about what I do. So I always see things that, this could be said, this could be said. But I have a body and a mind that needs to be always in balance. So the other part is being. You see, that's what they say. And see only that which remains to be accomplished. Well, what else can you see? That which simply is, being. And so they say, any seeker discovering in itself this complex of mental and mental-emotional distortions shall ponder the possibility, the possible non-efficacy of judgment. So judgment is the one that will see that inertia, that impetus, and say, man, we need to do more. We haven't done enough. We have to do. That's a judgment. I don't do enough. I'm insufficient. This is, it's not worthy. It needs to be better. It needs to improve. And yet at the same time, you can also live by the inertia of doing. You see, in being, because there is no such thing as just being. I guess you can, but that would be up to a point, just, a catatonic state. Even if you're just having visions and visions of the universe because all you do is meditate 24/7. You don't even need to sleep because you're in that state. You have become the greatest, quote unquote, meditator in the world. You're still doing. It's a subtle doing, but there's still experience going on. And so there's always doing, but you are at least going with the flow. You see, whatever you, the creator, is doing is what needs to be done, and that's it. So go with the flow, go with the Tao. You see, the Tao is not sunyata, just nothingness, the void. No, the Tao is everything. The Tao is what's happening. Go with it and you'll be fine. Because what? You're in being, you're being in motion, and you're being everything. That's beautiful. Whereas if you only focus on the doing of being, then you're going to be stressed out. So they say that they approached the second part of the question. Let's see what they said. Come on, there it is. This particular instrument was not trained, nor did it study, nor worked at any discipline in order to contact the Ra. We were able, as we have said many times, to contact this group using this instrument because of the purity of the instrument's dedication to the service of the one infinite creator, and also because of the great amount of harmony and acceptance enjoyed by each within the group. This situation making it possible for the support group to function without significant distortion. So very quick here, notable that, again they say it, Carla didn't come out of an esoteric cult or tradition or sect in which she was fully prepared throughout the decades of initiation and adepthood and reading and practicing and meditating. Carla was straight out coming out of college, met Dawn. She was interested in this channeling stuff. She got into it. She found an affinity with it and she went with it. So Carla was not trained, nor did she study, or she didn't work on any discipline to be able to contact Ra. So it was a fluke, you might say, and they would agree with this. It was a fluke, and she was able to channel Ra. Well, this means that, this comes at a price, which you don't know. You don't know anything about why you're doing this. It's almost like it's happening automatically, by without much awareness of what's happening. That's why Ra always invited them to bring more awareness into, why do you do this? Focus on that love and that harmony and everything that you have. Focus on that. You'll find a lot in there. Whether they did it or not goes beyond my knowledge, but I'm sure they all learned what they had to learn. And so Ra simply describes how they were able to contact them because of the instrument's dedication to the one creator, and because of the harmony and acceptance that they all had. That's it. It's a short description of what they have said over and over again, because of the harmony of the group, and also because Carla's dedication was just on point. She was fully dedicated, which was again a portion of her martyrdom syndrome, as I call it. The desire to dedicate yourself fully, completely, sacrifice everything that you have for a cause. I think finally this is the end of this question, and Ra says, "We are humble messengers. How can any thought be taken by an instrument as to the will of the Creator? We thank this group that we may speak through it, but the future is mazed. We cannot know whether our jest may, after one final work, be complete. Can the instrument then think for a moment that it shall cease in the service of the one infinite Creator? We ask the instrument to ponder these queries and observations." So here again they're describing the reality of the contact. Ra, they're simply humble messengers, which again, I simply see them as a fully experienced resource of the Creator's experience through different mind, body, spirit complexes, right? Different windows in which the Creator has experienced all the densities, right? They're a resource, a database of information, very much loaded with information. And yet there is just a small portion in the vast infinitude of reality. And the beauty for us is that they speak from that point in which, it's higher self. So they're not our higher self, but they speak from that point. And so the information distilled is very pure, very descriptive of reality, without polarities, without a bias, a particular bias, which is not characteristic of the other densities. So first of all, that. And then they throw the question, how can any thought be taken by an instrument as to the will of the Creator? How can any of us know the will of the Creator? We can only know it when it happened. And when it happened, then you cannot know it because it's known. You know what I mean? It's not the ego knowing it. It's the Creator knowing it and saying, oh, this happened. Oh, I just did this. This just happened. Great. And you learn from that. This learning is not the ego or the separate self learning. I say, oh yes, I'm very much knowledgeable now. It goes into a deeper intelligence that you have no access to. You're just experiencing it. And that's liberating, very liberating. So again, they thank the group and say the future is mazed, meaning that it's not known. We cannot know whether our jest, which is their is translated as their venture, their journey into this, their contribution, if you will end after one final working. It could be, they could have decided no more, I don't want to risk this anymore, or I'm not feeling well anymore. But their commitment was so big that we could see the sacrifice in the end of what seems to be Don's sacrifice with his suicide and for Carla. I think that's what happened. A lot of people think this way. It seems like this was one he did. But again, I don't like to talk about this because it's transit information. We don't know anything about it, and so we can only describe it poetically. And that's how I see it. And so, can the instrument then think for a moment that it shall cease in the service of the one infinite creator? That's a good point. You know, do you think that you're serving the one infinite creator by doing what you're doing? And if you don't do it, you won't? Something to ponder. There is something there. I'll add something else. There is an inertia of being that wants to serve in a direction, yes, in a specific direction. We know that, we feel that in ourselves. We want to do this. And yet, if we can't, does that mean that I'm not serving the Creator? Seems like the ego is involved there, if that's the case. So I leave that to ponder for yourselves too. Let's cover one more question and we'll be done for today. Question 10, this is out of the material, but I like it and we're going to explore it here. Don says, from the previous session, the statement was made that much is veiled to the most apparently clear observation. Would Ra expand on what was meant by that statement? I assume that this means the veiling of all of that is outside of limits of what we call our physical perception, having to do with the spectrum of light, etc. But I also intuit there is more than that veiled. Would Ra expand on that concept? Ra says, you are perceptive in your supposition. Indeed, we meant not any suggestions that the physical apparatus of your current illusion were limited as part of the veiling process. Your physical limits are as they are. However, because of the unique biases of each mind-body-spirit complex, there are sometimes quite simple instances of distortion when there is no apparent cause for such distortion. Let us use the example of the virile, I don't know how to pronounce that. Virility, I know that's the word. The virile, I'm going to say, an immature male, the horny male. That's the synonym. An immature male who meets and speaks clearly with a young female whose physical form has the appropriate configuration to cause for this male entity the activation of the red ray sexual arousal. So, what are we talking about here? First, Don is referring to something completely different. This is again outside the personal material, and he's asking about the limitations of the veil. Prior to the veil, there were not these limitations. He refers to the physical perceptions, right? But he intuits that there is something more that was veiled, which is true. I mean, the veil has very little to do with perception itself, but rather the access to the unconscious mind, which obviously explains better and allows us to see more the connectivity of everything. Yes? So incurring in a deeper, denser experience of separation, which we have talked about already. And so that's what it means. And it's not about the physical eye per se, or ears and any other vibration of light, which is what we perceive, really. So Ra is saying, no, we were not talking about just that, although, yes, in a way, it's true. That the physical limits are as they are, and that's just part of the illusion that is created by the veil. But no, they were talking about something else that is beyond our conscious mind. And that's what I just explained. So they're going to give the example of a male who is interested sexually in a female. Okay? So that's what they describe here first, and then they're going to elaborate more. They say, the words spoken by the male may be upon a simple subject, such as naming, information as to the occupation, and various other common interchanges of sound vibratory complex. The male entity, however, is using almost all the available consciousness it possesses in registering the desirability of the female. Such may also be true of the female. Thusly, an entire exchange of information may be meaningless because the actual catalyst is of the body. This is unconsciously controlled and is not a conscious decision. This example is simplistic, very simplistic. So the scenario is this. First, the question is regarding what is veil to us. What is veil to us, or the answer to this question, is the unconscious mind. What does the unconscious mind has? The unconscious mind has all the reasons, all the motivations, all the connectivity between our actions and our desires. Why do we want things? Why do we seek, for example? Oh, okay, I'm seeking the creator because I am the creator. I know that. Okay, well, there's not much intensity there. So we created the veil, and now it's like, I have no idea why I'm seeking. I have no idea why I'm horny. I have no idea why I feel compassion for this person. I have no idea why I feel compelled to talk about this. All these things we don't know. We just know that we know. That's it. And so, in a way, this makes it easier for us, and at the same time, paradoxically, makes it more difficult, which is the point. So they give the example of the male who approaches the female and just talks about, chit chat, stuff that is not related to how horny he is and how much he desires her. He doesn't know why. He just wants to have sex. So the whole purpose of this approach is to assess the possibility of having sex, and yet there is a slew of stuff that he has to emit as words, all kinds of sound vibrational complexes. Yeah, I work here, and my name is this, and I am that. But all of this has the point of, wanting to have sex. And yet he doesn't know why. You see? All of this is meaningless, right? All of this is, it's information that has no point regarding the true motivation that goes from the unconscious, right? This is unconsciously controlled, and it is not a conscious decision. This is catalyst of the body. So much, of course, this is the example of somebody who is not aware of why he wants things, but this is true of all of our desires and intentions. We want things because we don't know why, and then we do it, and then we're possibly able to find why and improve and evolve that desire. So this leaves us in a great spot for conclusions. Like I said, there was something that made me create this this title for the video, which is the last separation. This last separation is the first separation, because everything is cyclical. The universe is a manifestation, a limited manifestation of that which is infinite. Space, we could say, is infinite. There is no limit to space, no matter how much scientists would like to say it's a 14 billion light radius in light years in radius. No, space is infinite. There is no way to fashion an idea of, yes, there is a bubble of something, a membrane at the end of the observable universe. The phrase says it, observable. Yes, it's the universe that we can see. What we cannot see is still there. So that infinity is manifesting limited. That's the first separation, infinity from itself. And so the last separation is that which collapses distance between perceived and perceiver, between object and subject. This is something that we call self-realization. And it's a recognition that needs to take precedence over the conditioned mind this will enlighten truly the path of anybody, because you will see the inertia that I was talking about of being in doing, and yet see that there is no meaning whatsoever to the doing other than experience. And that experience can be taken in two directions, positive or negative. The positive one is in which being takes up everything or becomes everything. The negative is the one in which being becomes isolated, and now, because of the same inertia, wants to take over the universe, because it is itself. It only doesn't know it, and it thinks it needs to acquire it. Whereas the positive one doesn't even realize acquisition. There is just being. You don't acquire things. So the last separation is that, to me, whether you see it in third density right here on the positive side, path, or you see it in the negative path at the end of sixth density, or mid sixth density, I should say. It doesn't matter. That's the last separation. It's the first separation, which is self from self. If you follow this, you will find so much more that is not in the conceptual framework of the mind, which can only abstract things. If you find yourself, if you know yourself, then you're able to know things as they are. I am sometimes compelled to call this the meaningless meaning of life. To know that for you to give meaning to life, you must be meaningless. For you to be biased towards something, you must be unbiased. That's who you are. And yet, it's inconceivable for the mind to see itself as that. It's not possible. The limited can only know the limited. And yet, there is a way for the unlimited self, which is what we are, to see itself in both. Which is to see, I am this, and then I am moving. The last thing I would say is that this, as long as this separation exists, we are capable of, which I think Carla was, and honestly, a lot of us need to go through this process, which is to erode that ego that says, oh yes, everything is beautiful except me. I am just, this limited being enjoying reality. That eventually needs to die off, because that's limiting you. And that's what I call the positive ego, rather the negative ego. Positive ego is the one that feels bloated, and not bloated, but aggrandized by this. Whereas the negative one is the one that feels less. I'm just this little thing. But it's a spiritual one that says everything is beautiful, everything is divinity except me. I'm not that. That one needs to be eradicated eventually, because there's still a last separation there. You still think of yourself as something other than God. And so God is not itself, because God is not infinite without you. And that is so subtle in our thoughts, everyday thoughts, that creates this lack of self-esteem, which is, no, I'm going to feel too much if I realize that I am God. Well, you have to, otherwise you'll be subject to the ego in its most subtle way. Much can be said about this, but I'm going to cut it at this point. As usual, thank you so much for being a part of this and following. If you want to support my work, check the description and you can find more about how you can do that. Patreon, Instagram, go check out my content. And I hope that you have a really nice day or night wherever you are. That's it for me. Take good care of yourself, and I'll see you in part 2 of session 94.